Terry Fleck is the Executive Director of the Center for Food Integrity in Gladstone, Missouri. The Center for Food Integrity is an organization that was started about 10 years ago, and its mission is to build consumer confidence in the food production system that we have today. So what Terry is about is taking the integrity and the things that we just heard about and getting them out to consumers, and also listening to consumers and getting a feel for what they're bringing, what they want from us. Terry's background is really perfect for that. Right out of college, he worked in public relations for the Indianapolis livestock market. He then spent a number of years working for the U.S. Grains Council, listening to international buyers of the grains that we produce, both in Washington, D.C. and in Vienna, Austria. And then he spent another 16 years back in Indiana working with the pork industry in that state and sort of dealing with the consumer and producer issues that the pork industry has gone through. Since 2007, he's been at the Center for Food Integrity, and I think that background before made him perfect for the job to sort of think about what consumers are wanting, what they want from us, and what they're telling us. So Terry's presentation, Cracking the Code on Food Issues, is going to give us a little bit of insight into what the consumers are thinking. So please help me welcome Terry.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Great to be with you. Greetings from the Center for Food Integrity. Ray, if you're still in the audience, thank you very much, because I picked up some great stuff from that last presentation. But we're going to shift gears a little bit. First of all, I want to say thank you for at least entertaining, thank you very much, at least entertaining the consumer's idea and thought here. You see my personal email address. Feel free to contact me on any questions you might have. For those of you that repurpose presentations, if you want these slides, you're more than welcome to have any of these slides with proper attribution. So again, we appreciate the opportunity just to visit with you a little bit about the center. The Center for Food Integrity is actually based in Kansas City on the Missouri side. We are an international not-for-profit organization founded in 2007, so we're actually 8 years old, and we have one sole purpose, and that is to help today's food system earn consumer trust. So with that, there's a number of things that we do, and there's a number of things that we don't do. Number one that we don't do is we don't defend or protect anyone's interest within the food system. So we're not advocating for one type of food or against another type of food. We're not lobbying as an organization. We don't defend or protect brands or processes or certain companies. Really what keeps us up at night is we're concerned that today's consumer doesn't have the right types of information in which to make a balanced decision and an informed decision. So that's really our passion, is we want to help you as a food system work with today's consumers so that they can then gain more trust in where food is coming from today. So there's a couple of things several things that we do. We're one of the leading voices in a balanced public conversation about food. So we encourage consumers to ask questions, to have questions, and we embrace the skepticism of today's consumer. Number two is we want to align the culture of today's food system with consumer expectations, and that's really what we're doing here today. We're going to share with you some research coming from today's consumer about what they think about today's food system, what they think about today's food, and so we hope that over time we can then more closely align our food system with consumer expectations. And lastly, lastly, we convene, empower, and support food and ag stakeholders to operate in a manner that builds consumer trust. So we do a number of coalitions, a number of projects, annual meetings, those kinds of gatherings in which to convene and empower and support today's food system. We have over 150 project and member supporters. This is just a sampling of several of the brands that are involved in the center. And again, just a special shout out to the Kansas Soybean Commission. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and for sponsoring our time here. So we're going to do a couple things in our time together. Number one, I'm going to start off with just a explanation, may not be the only explanation that's there, but an explanation of why consumers are disconnected with today's food system. And then we'll talk a little bit about what builds trust. What is trust? How is that built over time? And then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about our 2015 research, which was all around transparency and how transparency can overcome this motivation bias. And this is just a spoiler alert. The motivation bias is big is bad. And so we'll talk a little bit about why the consumer believes that and what we can do as a food system to help them better embrace today's food system. And then I'm going to have just some general consumer attitudes. We have all kinds of these, but I've got a sampling in the slide deck today. And then lastly, we're going to end with how you can engage today's consumer to build trust. All right? So let's get started. First of all, we want to talk a little bit about consumer skepticism. And several audiences that we present really want to know what happened. What changed? Why is today's consumer now so skeptical? Why can't they just trust me? I mean, I've got their best interest in mind. I'm producing safe, affordable, abundant food. Why can't they just leave us alone, let us do what we want to do, and trust us to do what's right? What really changed? Well, I can look out and I can see several of you have gray hair like me, so you will remember 1968. Time magazine said that this was the year that shaped a generation. And for those of you that can remember, those of you that weren't born in 1968, just bear with us as we give you a quick history lesson. Those of you, though, that remember 1968, several major events happened in 1968 that shook the confidence of today's consumer. Number one, we had two very high-profile assassinations. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were both assassinated. We had demonstrations. I'd ask for a show of hands, but I can't really see all your hands. But those of you that were old enough can remember the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It was the first time we really had public demonstrations against our government and against our electoral system. It was also a time where the Vietnam War was going on. And for those of you that weren't born in '68, the Vietnam War was not a popular war. And it was the first time that a war was actually televised. We could watch, if you can believe it, only 3 channels where I grew up in Indiana, and you had to get out of the chair to change the television channel. But we had 3 channels, and it would bring in every night some kind of a scene from the war in Vietnam. Christmas Eve, 1968, was the first time that we actually saw a picture of our blue Earth from the moon. And many people will say that was probably the birth of the environmental movement when we realized that we are dealing with a finite resource. And then there were other very public events that shook our confidence in the institutions that we were trusting. We trust our police force. We trusted our political system. And people let us down, whether it was the Nixon resignation, whether it was the Iran-Contra affair, when our military institution was discredited. There were religious leaders. We thought we could trust our religious systems, and those failed us, and on and on. Other events, the Enron affair, the Arthur Andersen affair, and it just continued after '68 on these very high-profile events where we thought we could trust people, and instead we found out that we really couldn't trust them. And what started in 1968 and continues today is we as a people basically trust mistrust. You with me? Trust, mistrust. In fact, we think if anything is large, if it's institutional, then we shouldn't really trust it until it proves itself that it can be trustworthy. There were other significant things that have been happening in society over these years that are worth noting. Number one, authority used to be granted by office. If you had the position, if you had the vice presidency, if you had the presidency, You had an authority and people would adhere to that. Today, authority is primarily conveyed and granted by relationship. And it doesn't take us long to look at the proliferation of the digital networks and the social networks to really understand that one. It used to be that there was broad social consensus that was driven by the WASP male. It was the hierarchy. You rose to that certain level, you got the gray hair, and therefore people would say, whatever the boss says, we do. Today, there is no single social consensus. There's great diversity, there's many voices, and it's not confined just simply to WASP males. It used to be that communications was very formal and indirect. In fact, we had truly mass communication back to those 3 channels and no remote control. That was what we had. I grew up, we had 3 news networks and they were really all doing the same story. You may like one personality a little bit better, you may like one weatherman a little bit better, but in essence, it was really the same. Today, communication is very informal, very direct. In fact, we don't have mass communication anymore. We have masses of communicators. Anybody that has a cell phone thinks of themselves as a cinematographer, and therefore that's what we're really dealing with. And it used to be that progress was inevitable. In fact, one of the things that I always looked for was I wanted the march of progress because it brought convenience, it brought efficiencies, and we embraced science and technology. But today, progress is only possible. Just because you have an innovation, just because you have something that you think is better, doesn't mean that the public is automatically going to embrace that. And so there's been a number of shifts. Now, if you think about this, what has happened with the food system since 1968? Okay, so somewhat 45 plus years. What happened within the food system is we became an institution. We consolidated, we integrated, we applied industrial processes to the way that we produce food, to the way that we consume food. We did a number of things. We applied chemistry to our food in new and innovative ways, and we became what the public knew that they could not trust, which was just simply another institution. And whether you like Food Inc. or not, the reality is it's a pretty good descriptor of today's food system. And so we have become basically what the consumer has been mistrusting over time. Now, there's other compounding factors that apply here. Number one, the public is geographically and generationally removed from the food system, and it's getting progressive. Most consumers are 2 to 3 generations removed from that. You go to Europe, most people in Europe are probably 10 to 15 generations removed from food production. So people understand that there's been changes in the way food is produced, but they really don't know why. They don't know what's there. The other thing is we now have social media. Social media quickly amplifies all information. Doesn't have to be factual, but it's an amplifier of information that's out there. We've got 24/7 media news channels now that are really focusing on the dramatic. So they will find that off-scientific study, they'll find the sensational, and that's what they will oftentimes put out there. You couple that with the fact that everyone here, and really everyone that lives on this planet, is a food stakeholder. We all are involved in that. So we have to have food. It's necessary for our existence. It's very traditional. It doesn't take us long to figure out that there's birthdays where you have certain types of food. There are holidays where you have certain types of food. So it's very traditional and it's emotional. So when we start messing with food, we're messing with people's essence, and that really compounds some factors. So if you're wondering why this conference even had somebody on the agenda to talk about food, that's one of the reasons why. It's such a big deal in most people's lives. Now, at the center, several of the things that we do is we do a lot of social science, and we'll share some of that social science that's here. But at our inception, we really wanted to look at how do we build consumer trust, because we knew there was a growing gap. And we knew we had to narrow that gap if we were really wanting to move the food system forward. So if you haven't seen this, let me just unpack it briefly for a moment. The first place to focus, you can't see my little red thing right there, is at the very end of the model, freedom to operate. Okay, this is why most of you are involved in doing what you do. You like to have the freedom to operate, to do what you're most gifted at with minimal outside disruption. So in order to do that, you have to have what's called a social license, the privilege of operating with minimal formalized restrictions based upon maintaining the public's trust and basically doing what's right. Okay? So think about your children for a minute. You give your children freedom and you give them license to freedom provided you can trust them, right? So the moment that you can't trust them, you exercise, in that case, an aspect of parental control. So there are forces out there that want to access what's called social control, where they then can restrict your freedom and can dictate what you do based upon the fact that society no longer trusts you. Are you with me? Just a couple of you say, okay, I'm with you. I just want to make sure you're, okay, yeah, thumbs up, that'll work. So I just want to make sure you're still awake. Okay. So social license comes directly from trust. And what trust is something we can measure. And that's what we've been doing at the center really for the last 8 years. When we formed the center, we did a meta-analysis of 21 different studies that looked at trust in food. And we found that there were 3 drivers to trust. Number 1, influential others. Influential others are typically friends and family and credentialed individuals, doctors, dietitians, nurses, attorneys, CPAs, maybe not attorneys, but you know, credentialed people, okay? People that you trust, all right? And so influential others. The second driver of trust is really competency or our technical expertise. We would call that in food and agriculture science. It's what we're most comfortable in. It's what we like to talk about most. It's our technical ability, our expertise to really do this, cognitive understanding, replication, time and time again. The third driver we found was confidence. Confidence is just simply where the consumer asks, are you a person like me? Number 1. And number 2 is, can I really trust you to do what's right? So we measured this with well over 6,000 consumers, all types of food issues, food safety, food animal well-being, environmental sustainability, human rights, business ethics, all kinds of different issues. And the thing that we found in our research is that shared values or confidence is 3 to 5 times more important in building consumer trust than demonstrating technical skills or expertise. Now, I grew up in food and ag. It's been my career. And I always thought that if I just presented the right kind of information, the consumer would come over to my way of thinking. And so if they weren't tracking with me, if they weren't thinking the way I was thinking, then it was evident that I didn't have the right information. How many times, don't raise your hand, how many times have we said we need to educate the consumer? How many times have we said the consumer doesn't understand us? And so we then apply science. We do a research study and we explain logically how this progressively works, all right? And if they still don't understand us, what we would do is we would go back and we would do another research study, bring them more information, and think that if we just presented them the right information, they're going to come to the right decision, all right? But what this is saying is that's all wrong. In fact, what it's saying is your information is 3 to 5 times less important to the consumer than who you are as an individual and who you are as a person. So what the consumer has been saying is, I don't need more information. I really don't know who you are. I don't know you. You're faceless to me. I'm generationally removed from you. I'm geographically removed from you. I don't know who you are, and I want to know, are you somebody like me, and can I actually trust you to do what's right? And that was a very, very important learning for us at the center on how we need to approach this area of information. Now, this is Lawrence Kohlberg. He would never win the GQ status of the best dressed social psychologist. He was at the University of Chicago. He's passed now, but he spent his entire career on trying to understand how a person forms morals. How do they form values? How do they form ethics? And he came up with his moral hierarchy. 3 different levels, 6 different stages. They're not all that important, other than pre-conventional all starts with the thinking about a direct impact on me. All right? Are you with me on that one? The direct impact on me. Then you move on from not only thinking about me, but thinking about what society expects of me. And then lastly, you get to this post-conventional stage where he's really talking about you're not necessarily thinking about direct impact on you or impact on society. You're thinking about what's right in principle. Really, at the end of the day, what is right in principle? Now, the way this kind of works, and again, think of your children as a good example. The direct impact on me first starts with, look, if I do things wrong, there's some kind of punishment that comes out of that. If I do things right and I obey, then there's some kind of reward that comes from that. And over time, we realize that if we do the things that are expected of us, there will be more personal rewards, and we like that. But it's all about who? It's all about me. It's all about that direct impact on me. Secondly, then, we start to realize that, you know what, there's some expectation of society here. It's kind of the good boy, nice girl orientation where we realize that there's other people that are looking in, and then we realize, you know what, there is some benefit to having law and order because society functions better in regards to that, and so we go into this conventional stage. And then it's the post-conventional where we realize, look, there are probably these things that we are doing. We need to make a social contract. We need to be thinking about these things for everybody. It's probably a good thing for them to do. And then what Kohlberg says is you reach this highest level where you're really talking about a universal ethical principle, and you're thinking, you know what, this is good for everybody. And we should just jump to that point and get there. Now, here's what happens. When we talk about food and ag, and we say, and I'm going to use aquaculture here as just my example, but look, I take care of the water, I take care of the fish because it maximizes productivity and my return on investment. It's when we say, are you kidding me? This is how I make my living. Why would I pollute the air? Why would I pollute the water? All right? But you understand, the conversation is all about me. It's coming from my standpoint. Secondly, when we start to say, look, I do comply with all the regulations that are out there, the food safety laws, the things that the government is asking me to do, I comply. All you have to do is look at my records, look at my third-party verification. I'm doing the things that law and order is asking me to do, all right? So if you think about that, that's just getting a C in the grade scale. But when we hit the universal ethical principle, it doesn't mean that I'm doing it directly for the impact to me, or I'm doing it because that's what society expects me to do. It's when we have the conversation, you know, really, at the end of the day, whether somebody tells me to do it or not tells me to do it, I have an ethical obligation to the people that work for me, to you as a consumer. I have an ethical obligation to the planet that I need to produce food responsibly and keep it safe. It's a universal ethical principle. Now, here's what happens. When we come to the controversy in the argument, non-government organizations or consumer groups or animal rights groups or other types of groups that are out there wanting to exercise more social control over the food system, they're talking about principle. When we come to the conversation, we're thinking about business because we know at the end of the day we have to make money out of this or we cannot exist. So when we enter most conversations, we automatically enter with a credibility deficit. we already have two dings against us because our thought process cognitively is, how can I do this and still make some money out of it? Why they are talking about these universal principles. Doesn't mean that you can't overcome the deficit. It just means you have to think differently. You're going to have to try a little harder in order to be on the same level and talk principle with the other NGOs as they're talking principle. Anyway, I wanted to share that because I think that helps actually in how we think. Another model that we have at the center is our sustainability model. And it really, all three sides, we write it as a triangle because all three aspects need to be here. But if shared values are 3 to 5 times more important in building trust, we have to start at the bottom of the triangle. So when we come in with new products, when we come in with conversations, when it's communication plans, whatever that is, we have to ground our message first in ethics. Because this is what the consumer is looking for. They want to know, are you somebody like me? So there are really several ethical principles, but 5 of them are here: compassion, responsibility, respect, fairness, and truth. So what the consumer is thinking is, if you raise animals, do you have compassion on them? So when they see an undercover video and they see ill treatment of animals, they say, they don't have the same value set that I have. They're not practicing compassion. Or responsibility. Do you take care of your people? Are you ethical with them? What about your employees? Are you responsible? Are you respecting them? Do you respect me as a consumer? Do you respect my opinion? And are you practicing fairness and truth? So they're looking for value similarity because that's what's going to build trust. Then we bring in science. It doesn't mean that science isn't important. Science is very important because it's objective. It's a verifier, though, to the decisions that we are making. And then lastly, we certainly need economics in here because if we can't be economically viable, we cannot be sustainable. So all 3 of these aspects have to be there: ethics, science, and economics. Now, most of the questions that are being asked by consumers today in the food system are ethical questions. Should you house that many animals in one place? Should you use crop protection chemicals on the food that you grow for me? Should you be using genetically modified technology in seed breeding? Should you? Our easy answer, or our default answer, is science says we can. But that isn't what the consumer is asking. The consumer is asking a should question. We give them a can answer, and that's why we have a disconnect. And so we may be very comfortable with the science, but we may not be nearly as comfortable with the ethics. And that's really where the consumer wants to have the conversation. Because at the end of the day, they are not going to make decisions based off of more knowledge. They are going to make decisions based off their feelings and belief. Does that make sense? All right, at the risk of opening up a floodgate, I'm going to stop. Any questions on the models? You'll have to yell them out if you have any questions. I'm not going to pause real long. Okay. So when we think about the consumer and the decisions that they have to make, it's not as simple as one might think. There are a number of things that are happening within the consumer's mind that are preventing them from making an informed decision. Bad news bias, inconsistency of news, confirmation bias, influence of group values, thing called bounded rationality, where the consumer says, I only have so much time, I only have so much cognitive effort and energy I'm going to give to this, so if you can't put that into a tweet, or if you can't get that boiled down into a Facebook post, then I'm probably not going to read it. So there's a number of things that are there, even scientific illiteracy, and the fact that they're fearful of science. All of these things are standing in the way of informed decision making. The other thing is we have this radically amplified environment. I mean, it used to be in the food system, if we had an issue, we could check with the NGOs and see what they were saying. We could look at the processor, the producer, the distributor. We could talk to the other channel partners in the grocery and the restaurant end of things, and we could resolve the issue. Now we have things like Facebook, and we have Twitter, and we have YouTube, and we have all these kinds of things that complicate matters and amplify matters so that it's much more difficult to address the issue over time and do it in a clear way. The other challenge is we all thought that the World Wide Web was going to make us one homogeneous population, right? We could all communicate together. We would all know what things were going on. But what it's created is a very tribal and insular environment. So if you are trying to reach 27-year-old moms in the Hispanic culture on the West Coast, if you are not where they are looking for information, you are not going to communicate with them. So for me, if I am expecting that a mommy blog is going to accept something by me, I'm kidding myself, because I'm not one of them. So they're going to be listening to one of them in regards to answers to the questions that they have. This just happens to be a quote from a qualitative focus group. We did this one in 2014. This was in Orlando. We had a group of moms together. It was the Mom Tribe. And we asked them, what information sources do you use to come up with this bias that you believe GMOs are dangerous? Now, this is Heidi. Heidi says, look, I'm part of a mom's group. When there's a big consensus, I think there's something there. You don't need doctors or scientists confirming it when you have hundreds of moms. Okay? And I see some of the women shaking their head. I've got daughters that think this, all right? And they're well informed. But they also know that consensus weighs the day. So this is a mommy tribe thought process that's been going on. All right. I'm going to shift gears again. We're going to look at some data. Hopefully it won't be boring, but a little bit about our consumer trust survey. Every year we are in the field qualitatively and quantitatively talking to consumers about issues. So this is our 2015 study. It was fielded with 2005 consumers in November of the year. Thanks to the sponsors, United Soybean Board, American Farm Bureau, and DMI. We're all major sponsors to that effort. We oversampled in Indiana and Michigan, and we do that occasionally through Michigan soybean and Indiana corn. And then we had a number of additional sponsors with Bunge, the International Life Sciences Institute, the Council for Biotechnology Information, the Illinois Soybean, and Grupo Bimbo, which is the largest North American baker around. So anyway, thanks to those sponsors for making this a reality. If you want more information on this, there's a 24-page executive summary. It's in a PDF, free download at foodintegrity.org. Look at the research tab. There will be that summary. There will be summaries from all of our research years back to 2008, so it's there and available for you. We really had two things we wanted to do in 2015. We wanted to better understand the role that transparency plays in building trust, and we wanted to identify best practices that increase transparency. So a little bit about the data. We start with an 8 questions, 17 to 18 life issues. We just simply want to know when you're pressed in life, where is food in all of that? How does it stack up with all the other issues that you're faced with? So it's a busy slide, but you can see the stair step, the first top 5 issues. All right, this is on a scale of 1 to 10. 73% of the consumers were strongly concerned with rising healthcare costs, rising cost of food. That's an economic issue, not a food issue. U.S. economy, keeping healthy food affordable, and rising energy costs. So if you want to get into core food issues, they're not top of mind, with the exception of the affordability of food. Okay? And how much it costs them. You have to go into this second tier of issues, which is they're under additional food safety or food system concerns. 62% said they were concerned about food safety. That is the number one consumer issue. They'll always be most concerned about the safety of food. They expect it to be safe, and they're surprised when it isn't. Having enough food to feed people in the United States, 53% were strongly concerned with that. Only 47% strongly concerned with the humane treatment of farm animals. The lowest concern, this was an aided question, having enough food to feed people outside the United States, only 1 in 3 are really concerned about that issue. Most people are not concerned with that. Now, one quick side road. If you talk to consumers and you are using the excuse of feeding the world in order to grow the food system, I'm just going to tell you, if you're just simply using that, you're not connecting with consumers. They could give a, I don't want to say that, they could care less about whether or not you're feeding the world. As far as they're concerned, there's an obesity problem, and every time I go into the grocery store, it looks like there's plenty of food on the shelf. So I don't need a growth in an impersonal food system. That's the way they're going to look at it. If you're going to use feeding the world, do me a favor, tie it to some personal benefit to them. That's what they're looking for, is how does this help me, all right? Not about some altruistic virtue that this is what we're doing. I know it's a good virtue. Really, I do. It just doesn't connect with consumers, that's all. That's just the short part of that. Women generally more concerned about food issues than men. Early adopters is the classification that we look at, more concerned about these issues than later adopters. We also do additional segmentation on moms, millennials, and foodies. They're not the only ones we segment, but we really look at this one because this is where most of the social conversation is occurring. All right, so if you look at those, I've highlighted in red, with millennials and foodies, keeping healthy food affordable is their number one concern. With moms, it's number 3, okay? With rising cost of food being number 1. So when you think about this community, moms, they're pretty easy to identify. Millennials, ages 21 to 34, is how we gauge those. Foodies, these are people that have a hobby in regards to food, all right? So what they're saying is they want healthy, affordable food. Now, if I can connect the dots, this is what most of you do, is you produce healthy, affordable food. It's really what today's food system does and why it exists, and that's why it's important to help consumers understand that, because we do have to connect the dots for them. We ask a general Gallup poll, is the food system headed in the right direction or is it on the wrong track? 40% of consumers believe the food system is on the right track. Gender differences galore. 49% of the men feel it's headed in the right direction. Women are much more negative in regards to that. 31% think it's on the wrong track. All right? The only thing this means is if you have a choice, have a conversation with a mom or a woman, have a conversation with a man, I would suggest, as long as it's okay with your significant other, have the conversation with the woman, because she's the one who's more nervous and more concerned and has more questions and is less trusting about the things that you do. All right? Now, here's some differentiation between moms, millennials, and foodies. The big takeaway for me in this one, look at the red numbers, all right? This is moms, 31% right direction, 32% wrong track, 37% unsure. Moms today are extremely conflicted. They really don't know who to trust. They don't know where to go for information. They really are unsure about the decisions that they are making for their family. Millennials, a little stronger, 41%, 26%, 33% unsure, so they're a little more confident. When you get to foodies, you're going to find that foodies, again, it's a hobby, foodies have figured out the food system. It's working for them, it's doing what they want, they've been asking for specific things with the food system. The food system has responded to them in a positive fashion, so they're much more confident in regards to today's food system than what you might think. Sources of information about the food system, not a big surprise to you, but this is the first year that our survey work actually showed that websites are the number one site for sources of information about food. Local television has for years and years and years had that number one spot. It now has fallen down to 15%. It always surprises me that people look for local television for news about food, but they do, all right? Friends and family not online bring up the other two top categories there. When you look at the breakout with moms, millennials, and foodies, not a surprise for this age category and the hobby of the foodie, they are looking for websites to give them information. So this is where you want to have the good information. This is really good news because we can put information on websites in a very affordable manner and help the consumer figure out a lot of these food issues. All right. The heavy social science for just a moment, building trust through transparency. Let me explain the model at the risk of losing some of you. Hang with me on this one. All right, our previous research has always shown that trust is best built through shared values. All right, so shared values is really the foundation for building trust. Are you with me on that? Just say yes. Okay. All right. We also know, particularly from 2013 when we did some research, that there's a motivation bias. And we've been measuring this for the last couple years. In other words, this motivation bias is where the consumer says big is bad. I don't trust big. Big is impersonal. When we ask them, what do you not like about a big food system? They said, look, it's large, it's impersonal, I have no idea who's producing my food. That's number one. Number two, it's large and it's impersonal, and there's pressure put on profit. All right, and then number three, when push comes to shove, you are going to make a profit decision rather than a public interest decision, and I'm lost. So therefore, I don't like a big food system. So we asked the question, what is it that will help you embrace a larger food system? They said you needed to be more transparent, okay? So we went out to measure those. Let me just go to the slide and I'll come back. This is, small farms are likely to put their interests ahead of my interests, okay? So 27% of the population, 1 in 4, said that's true. Last year it was 31%, okay? So that's why this actually came down. 51% said, I don't know about that. Just about 1 in 4 said, no, that's not true, all right? So that's the small farm. Here's the large. 47% of consumers said a large food system, large farms will put their interests ahead of my interests, okay? Large will trump. Okay, so look, 27%, 47%. Mean score 5.56, mean score 7.06, all right? So that's with 2,000 consumers. That's very much a hard statistic that this motivation bias is real, all right? So we focus then on transparency as a way, what can we learn about transparency that will actually help us overcome this motivation bias and get us to the point of shared values, okay? That's the social science. So really what you don't see here is what we do is all of these marks right here are all measured with regression ratios and pretty in-depth social science, all right? Okay, so we also took 6 areas of interest that we really wanted to know about, and that was impact on health, food safety, business ethics, animal well-being, labor and human rights, and environmental impact. So those were the 6 core areas that we looked at, and then we also looked at these 4 aspects. Number 1, policies. We wanted to know what I'm supposed to do as a policy, how does that impact transparency? A practice, what I actually do, all right? It's my values in action. What I'm doing is practices. Performance is what I did in the past. Third-party verification is what somebody else proves that I did, okay? So that's the science that was there, and that's what we measured against those 6 areas of transparency, and then we looked at illustrative policies and practices and verification in all of those areas, all right? And then how that impacted trust. So those were the regression ratios that we measured throughout this whole data. What matters most, the big key learning, is transparency is no longer optional if you really want to build trust. Okay? We're just in a society right now where they're expecting radical transparency. They want to know everything. They want everything shown in regards to that, so it's not optional. Now, when it comes to did transparency actually build trust, the answer is yes. So 2/3 to 1/2 of all consumers said that if you're transparent about food safety, diet and health, treatment of animals, human and labor rights, business ethics, and environmental stewardship, that will build trust. That's those blue bars, all right? Now, I can just tell you right now that there is no statistical difference between the mean scores in each of these areas. So if you're looking at this saying, look, I can be transparent about food safety, but I don't need to be transparent about environmental stewardship, that's not what the science is saying. It's saying that all of those are there. It is saying that food safety and diet and health are most expected in regards to that, but all of them statistically are just about the same across all levels. I'm going to skip that slide. That one's there if you want it. So who do consumers hold most accountable? This is kind of interesting. So we ask between food companies, farmers, grocery stores, and restaurants, who do you hold responsible to be transparent about issues? Impact on diet and health, they are expecting the food companies. Now, they had 100 points to allocate across this area. So on an average, 41 said they want the food companies to be transparent about diet and health. 28% said farmers, restaurants and grocery stores, 15 and 16, respectively in that. When it came to food safety, it's really the food companies. When it came to environmental impact, a little more on the farmer side is where they expect some responsibility. Labor and human rights, it's the food company. When it comes to animal well-being, it's the food company, not the farmer. And when it came to business ethics, it was the food company and not the farmer. Now, the one surprise on this when we looked at it was really animal well-being. We anticipated that since you as a farmer are the one responsible for raising the animals, then you ought to be the one who's most accountable when it comes to the treatment of farm animals. But that's not what the consumer is saying. The consumer is saying is, no, we hold the food company most responsible. And the reason why is because as a food company, you control your supply chain. And if your supply chain is not doing it right, we expect you to implement policies and practices that you eliminate that. All right? Yes, we understand that farmers need to take care of animals, but we're holding you as a food company most responsible for being transparent on that. Now, what that means is you still don't escape if you're a farmer. It just means you're going to have more pressure coming from the food companies to be more transparent about the things that you do. All right? That's all that means. All right, what matters most? What information do consumers want and where do they want it? It really depends on the topic. Now, I'm just going to cut to the chase and just give you the results of this one and not build it, but practices were most predictive of global transparency in 5 out of 6 topical areas. The only area that it wasn't was in diet and health. And really what the consumer is looking at in diet and health is they will consume a product for a period of time, and then they will look at the performance. So does it make me slimmer? Does it make me fatter? Does it make me healthier? Does it make me unhealthier? They want to look at that over time. But everything else, they are expecting the practices to be shown in how all of these other areas are taken care of, all right? So practices, your practices, what it is that you do, not what somebody else is saying that you did, not some policy that really says this is what I'm supposed to do. They want to know what you are doing as a way to measure transparency and build trust, all right? So the best overall practice for you is to really provide stakeholders with the means to engage and participate in conversations and discussions about your products and about your services. So they want to know the how. All right? And there's numerous ways that you can do this. Many of you already blog or take pictures or use Instagram or have conversations. But what people are really wanting to know is tell me about the practices. And that's where it comes back to the ethics. They want to know about these things. They want to know why you do what you do. All right? And that's kind of what Ray was talking about there toward the end is they want to know the why. They want to know the ethics. They want to know why we house that many animals. They want to know why we practice the conservation practices that we do. They want to know why you utilize chemicals or don't utilize chemicals. They want to know why GM technology is important to you or not important to you, because as far as they're concerned, they don't understand it. They don't know why they don't understand it. They're against it, but they don't know why they're against it, and that's just the way it works, all right? So a couple other things, tracking attitudes of our food supply over time, a couple things on economics. Food prices are a greater concern to me than they were a year ago. Some softening of that in 2015. Probably because of the good economy. 52%, though, still saying food prices are a greater concern than they were a year ago, so just over half the population, still a strong mean to that. I'm concerned about the affordability of healthy food. We've only been measuring this one for 3 years. Still a strong mean score, 57% concerned about the ability to afford healthy food. When it came to food safety, just a couple of these, I'm confident in the safety of the food that I eat. We were growing in confidence over the last several years. We kind of plateaued in 2015. 35%, though, still saying they strongly agree that they are confident in the safety of the food that they eat. When it came to farm animal welfare, so I don't know if you have animals or not, this one's kind of interesting. If farm animals are treated decently and humanely, I have no problem consuming meat, milk, and eggs. Consumer fully agrees with that. And for the last 4 years, we've been on a nice upward track, right? 60% of all consumers say, yeah, absolutely. Treat them decently, humanely, I'll consume it. Here's the problem. Only 25% believe that today's food supply is derived from humanely treated animals when it comes to the meat sector. So, if you're involved in animal agriculture, notice this gap. This is huge, okay? So those of you friends in animal ag, this is what we have to make up. And this is somewhat the impact of undercover videos, but it's also the fact that they don't see animals being raised, they don't know anything about them. As far as they're concerned, they're inside buildings and they don't know what happens unless Mercy for Animals or somebody else happens to release an undercover video and all they see is the negative, all right? So if you want to do a YouTube video, if you want to be popular on YouTube, take some pictures of what goes on inside your barns, and you'll become a little more popular in regards to that. All right, key takeaways. We're going to land this plane. 2015 research proves scientifically that increasing transparency increases consumer trust. Okay, remember what trust does. Trust gives you the social license to operate freely. If the consumer trusts you, they will give you license. If they don't trust you, they will control you. Okay, so being transparent increases that trust. Number two, transparency isn't optional. Transparency is a basic consumer expectation. It's table stakes now, all right, and so they're expecting it to happen. Number three, consumers are going to hold food companies primarily responsible for transparency. That's a key takeaway. This next year, we're going to do more work in the whole farm production area and arena to see if we can understand that a little bit more. Number four, transparency is the key to overcoming the big is bad bias. So when consumers say, I don't like a big food system, then what they're saying is it needs to be more transparent for me to build trust there. The other thing is that consumers want information on company practices. That applies to the farm as well, all right? Practices are illustrative of your values and actions, and we know that values drive trust. So that's what they're really saying is, I need to see your values, not just simply articulated, I need to see those in action. And then consumers, bottom line, want the ability to engage with you. They want to be heard, they want to be acknowledged, they want straight answers to their questions, all right? So what matters most is really engaging meaningfully to build trust. So as we wrap this, today's consumers are shifting in their societal attitudes. Okay? They're not so much trusting the authorities of old. They're really looking at friends and family of somebody they can trust. They know they have many choices. They know there's many voices out there. They will gravitate toward one or the other in regards to that. There is an inherent mistrust in farming and food, and it's because they don't understand what has happened. They just simply know it's gotten bigger, it's gotten institutionalized. Institutions are things that they are to mistrust, and so therefore it's there with food and farming. So they want to know, they want to trust the people behind their food. It's just a reality. They understand that there's been a change, they don't know why, and so they're asking questions in regards to that. And always remember, food is necessary, food is traditional, food is personal. So when you're talking to a stakeholder, they have some investment in this. And please remember the trust model. I'm not going to repeat it up here, but shared values, who you are as an individual, is 3 to 5 times more important than what you know. So share your values with them first before you tell them and explain to them what it is that you do and why you do it. Okay, so this is not difficult. It just simply means I can understand why you might be confused. I can understand why you may not trust me because you don't know who I am, you don't know what I do. I would be glad to share some information with you. Do you have a few moments that we could talk? All that means is you're just simply acknowledging what it is that they're saying. That works much better than you are a jerk. Where in the name of creation did you get that misinformation? You've been watching Facebook again? You've been reading those things? I mean, that just doesn't work, guys, okay? I'm talking to my male gender because that's what we think. We got to be careful. What comes out of the mouth is the meditation of the heart. So anyway, remember, shared values, 3 to 5 times more important than building trust. Teddy Roosevelt got it right. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Sorry to use him, but that's just the way it is. So it doesn't mean that you abandon science and facts. Please hear me on that one. It just means lead with shared values if you want to build trust. Your science and facts are important, but don't make those the first things out of your mouth. So our goals should be embrace the skepticism. Say, I get it. You're a mom, you're a millennial, you're a foodie, you have questions, you think we're bad guys. I get it. I understand, all right? I'm going to embrace the skepticism. You've got real concerns. I understand that. Perceptions are realities, so let me share with you a little bit about who I am and about what it is that I do. Sharing your values, that's really what it's all about. Okay, I'm going to stop because I'm between you and a break, right? You're tired of sitting. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? There's no roving mics, so you're going to have to yell them out. Any questions? Yeah, so the question was, it's perplexing when there's so many questions, and the skepticism, I'm going to put words out here, skepticism when there's no real tie back to where the food comes from, country of origin, processes that are in place, those kinds of things. We do have research, there's an attitudinal slide here, they would prefer to buy U.S., all right? They understand that food is sourced globally today, and there's increasing concern and scrutiny particularly over international products. I mean, there's a reason why the Chinese bought Smithfield. There's a reason why there's real food safety questions in some of our international neighbors' food supply. But again, yeah, consumers are beginning to ask more questions about those kinds of things, how and where products are sourced, how they're processed. But again, they want to see transparency, but not all of them are going to gravitate in that direction. But that's a very good point, that we're going to have to become much more transparent, not only to processes, but to the origin of several of those food ingredients. Other questions? Yeah, I would guess that the question was, so how can we be more transparent? How can we communicate to today's consumers in those areas? My first advice would be do it on the internet and do it through the internet. I would make sure if I've got a company that I've got a web page, that my policies, my practices are there and visible. If I can just, I mean, it's not that expensive to shoot a YouTube video. Just remember, a 1-minute video works a lot better than a 5-minute video when it comes to consumers' attention. So put things up, randomly do things. If you have bloggers on your staff, empower them to blog, encourage them to do that. We have research. You can contact us at the center if you're really trying to get to a specific demographic type. So if you want to get to 26-year-old Asian moms on the West Coast, we have ways and suggestions for you to do that. But if it's just generally, if I've got a company or if I've got a farm, Occasionally do some Instagram. If you don't know how to do it, ask your 16-year-old daughter or niece or nephew how to do that. Ask them to do it. Shoot a YouTube video. It doesn't have to be professional. In fact, if it's more genuine, the better it really is because it's more trusted. But that's what I would do. Just simply be more transparent and think about the things that you do that consumers might question. And then shoot that and be able to talk about that in a way to help them understand it. Does that make sense? Great question. Yes, sir. That's perfect. Yeah. Should we as farmers pay more attention to who we're selling our products to, and perhaps the ethics or the processes that company then does with those ingredients? Absolutely yes. Okay, because at the end of the day, the consumer is holding who you selling your products to more responsible for transparency than you, and that will bounce back on you, all right? So that works both ways. Even though the company can control the supply chain, you also can control what company you sell that to. So again, I would observe their policies, their practices, what they're known for, what their reputation is, how long they've been in business. All of those aspects, I think, are all part of that equation. That's very fair. Good question.
Another question?
All right, I'll be around for a little bit if there's
a related one. I just wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Somebody asked a great question about how do we reach them. How do you think consumers feel about what you were talking about, which is individual websites, individual efforts? I mean, how many of you folks haven't seen the Peterson brothers, right? I mean, that's pretty effective stuff. Versus what we're doing at a commodity group level and some of those kind of issues. Because sometimes we sort of let our organizations sort of carry the freight for us. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and we know this from patterns of how consumers source information. Consumers are really pretty intelligent when it comes to this. So they will look at a .org site, and if it's a commodity group, they understand that they've got an inherent bias. All right, that they're going to point out all the positives to that issue. They'll also look at the .org site that might be the advocacy site, and they realize that, you know what, they've got an agenda, they've got fundraising that they've got to do, so probably all of their information isn't correct either. So they will look at both and say the truth is probably someplace here in the middle. There's probably some good things that this group is saying, there's probably some good things this group is saying. What they want to hear from is you, because they know you're going to be genuine with them. They really do trust you, and they trust your voice. And so they are looking for that genuine interaction where they can simply ask their questions.